Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the absolute epic that is the Maurya Dynasty. I mean, we're talking about ancient India's greatest empire, and this story, it literally has everything. You've got massive armies, brilliant political strategy, devastating betrayals, and ultimately a profound spiritual awakening. So let's jump right into the core mystery of how a world defined by the ruthless clash of swords transformed into an empire ruled by the lasting power of ideas.
Think about this fundamental paradox for a second. How exactly did a penniless scholar with absolutely zero resources and an unknown young boy playing in the dirt manage to build the most formidable empire ancient India had ever seen? And, even crazier, why did the rulers of this unstoppable, all-powerful empire eventually choose to just lay down their weapons? It's an incredible story of power, strategy, and human transformation, and it all starts right here.
Part 1, The Insult and the Vow.
Okay, let's set the stage. To really understand this, we've got to travel back to the 4th century BC. The Indian subcontinent had moved past the era of the 16 Mahajanapadas, those great early kingdoms. Out of all of them, one absolute powerhouse stood supreme, Magadha, ruled by the Nanda Dynasty. On one side of our story, you have King Nanda. This guy wasn't just a king. He was unmatched in wealth. His treasury was basically overflowing, and he had thousands of war elephants and millions of soldiers at his disposal. He was, for all intents and purposes, invincible. But on the other side, we have Chanakya, a scholar with zero resources, zero royal backing, and absolutely no army. But he did have one of the most brilliant, razor-sharp minds in human history, backed by a fierce determination. So what sparks this whole epic? A massive, very public insult. Chanakya shows up at Nanda's court on official business, but instead of getting an audience, he's mocked for his appearance and brutally humiliated right in front of the entire assembly before being thrown out on the street. Right then and there, Chanakya literally unties his hair. Now, in ancient scholarly circles, that's basically the equivalent of a dramatic mic drop. He takes a public vow that he will never tie it back up until the entire Nanda Dynasty is completely destroyed. But, how does one guy take down an empire? Well, soon after, Chanakya spots this young boy playing with his friends, pretending to be a king and a judge. The kid's natural, decisive leadership just jumps out at him. That boy was Chandragupta. Chanakya saw the raw potential, scooped him up, and took him to the great university of Taxila to mold him into a future emperor.
Part 2, The Strategy of Edges.
While Chandragupta was deep in training, the geopolitical landscape of the world was shifting violently. By 326 BC, Alexander the Great was knocking on India's northwestern doors. Chanakya and Chandragupta decided, okay, it's time to make our move. They launched their first direct attack right at the heavily guarded heart of Magadha. And it was a complete and utter disaster. They got absolutely crushed by the Nanda army. But, as they say, failure is a great teacher. According to legend, their turnaround came from the most unexpected place. Chanakya overheard a mother scolding her child for burning his fingers on a hot flatbread. She says to him, "You are making the exact same mistake as Chandragupta, eating bread from the center instead of the edges." Boom. That simple household moment gave Chanakya his ultimate military epiphany. A direct strike at the center was suicide. So they completely flipped their playbook. Step 1, start at the edges. They systematically began conquering the weaker border states. Step 2, build a massive spy network. They wove this intricate web of informants to gather intel and actually turned Nanana's own enemies against him. And step 3, surround the capital. Slowly but surely, they choked off the empire's resources from all 4 directions.
This slow, methodical squeezing of the edges worked flawlessly. The borders broke, the fortresses fell, and finally, the gates of Pataliputra were breached. By 322 BC, Chandragupta ascended the throne, and the first unified Indian empire was born. But securing the throne was really just the opening act. We're talking about a timeline that spans from Alexander's advance in 326 BC all the way to the eventual fall of the empire in 1805 BC. It was a massive, multi-generational epic.
Part 3, Building the Empire. Now, taking an empire is one thing, right? Keeping it is a whole different ballgame. Around 305 BC, Alexander's general Seleucus Nicator marched toward India, pretty confident he could plant the Greek flag there. But he wasn't facing fractured kingdoms anymore. He ran straight into Emperor Chandragupta Maurya and was totally defeated. Seleucus actually had to sign a treaty and sent a Greek ambassador, Megasthenes, who lived there and documented their incredibly advanced society. And this brilliantly illustrates how they actually ran things.
Under Chanakya's guidance, Chandragupta built a masterclass in administration. They had highly organized departments for taxes and revenue, a robust justice system, agriculture and trade oversight, and of course military logistics. This strict, specialized system was the absolute engine that kept this giant empire running smoothly for decades.
But get this, the end of Chandragupta's reign is probably the most shocking part of his entire life. After years of bloody conquests and ruling this vast domain, the great conqueror just lays down his crown. He literally abdicates the throne to become a monk. He hands the power to his son, Bindusara, and travels down to South India with the Jain teacher Bhadrabahu to fast as a Jain ascetic. The man who had taken the world by the sword ultimately left it in absolute ascetic silence.
Part 4. The Kalinga War. Let's fast forward a bit. After Bindusara expanded the empire further south, a bloody succession war broke out. Out of that chaos, around 269 BC, a new prince seized control. His name was Ashoka, and in his early years, Ashoka was ruthless. He pushed the borders everywhere, making the Maurya Empire an unstoppable juggernaut. But there was one fiercely independent state left that refused to bow, Kalinga. In 261 BC, Ashoka marched on them. The war that followed was just horrific. We're talking over 100,000 dead and wounded. Hundreds of thousands of families were utterly destroyed. Ashoka won the war, making the entire subcontinent his, but at a staggering human cost. Standing on that blood-soaked battlefield, looking at the sheer scale of human suffering and families searching for their loved ones, something inside the conqueror just broke. For the first time, there was zero pride in his victory. He had a profound, life-altering realization. Swords can win land, but they cannot win hearts. The violent conquest he had pursued suddenly felt entirely hollow. Part 5. An Empire of Peace. From the ashes of Kalinga, a completely different ruler emerged. Ashoka transformed from a ruthless conqueror into a philosopher king, deeply embracing the teachings of Buddhism. He decided right then and there that his massive empire wouldn't be forged by weapons anymore. Instead, he deployed a new kind of power, Dhamma. Now, this wasn't really a strict religion. It was a universal moral code centered on nonviolence, immense compassion, tolerance, and ethical living. And to make sure everyone got the message, he literally had these principles carved into giant rock faces and towering sandstone pillars all across the empire. He wanted future generations to know the true, peaceful meaning of governance. Sadly, all great historical cycles do eventually come to an end. Ashoka passed away in 232 BC, and the empire slowly began to weaken. His successors just couldn't handle the massive administrative weight of the territory. The central authority fractured, and fast forward to 185 BC, the final Mauryan emperor, Brihadratha, was assassinated by his own military commander. And just like that, India's first great unified empire officially came to a close. But that brings us to the real legacy of this epic. The physical borders of the Maurya Empire dissolved over 2 millennia ago, sure. But Chanakya's absolute genius in administration and strategy, we are still studying it today. Ashoka's Wheel of Dhamma, it sits proudly right at the center of the modern Indian flag. So looking at everything we just unpacked, I'll leave you to ponder this. The Maurya Empire eventually fell, but its ideals of administration and peace live on. Ultimately, what makes an empire truly immortal? The strength of its swords or the enduring power of its ideas? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this gave you a lot to think about.